It may be special, but the close relationship between Trump and Netanyahu is causing controversy. The decision to bar two Congresswomen from entering Israel has sent shockwaves through both countries. So, what does that mean for the long-term ties between the U.S. and Israel? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Israel's recent decision to ban a visit by two U.S. Democrat Congresswomen has drawn a lot of controversy within the two allies. The move to deny Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar entry was condemned by top Democrat politicians. It's also been criticized by a pro-Israel lobbying group. Tlaib and Omar had planned to visit Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories this weekend. Tlaib was then allowed to make a humanitarian visit to her grandmother, but she rejected Israel's offer. The pair are known for their support of the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions Campaign, or BDS, which aims to put pressure on the Israeli government over its treatment of Palestinians. Under Israeli law, supporters of the campaign can be denied entry. President Donald Trump had called for the two lawmakers to be blocked ahead of Israel banning them. And the president has taken some decisions seen to have supported Netanyahu's power. Trump has recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the U.S. embassy there. He's also recognized Israeli sovereignty over the occupied Golan Heights. He's announced the so-called deal of the century to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The political details of the plan are yet to be revealed, but Palestinians believe it won't be fair to their cause. The president has ended U.S. funding for the UN agency providing basic assistance to Palestinian refugees. And Trump's increased pressure on Iran is believed to be in Netanyahu's favor. The U.S. has pulled out of the 2015 nuclear deal with the country and labeled its Revolutionary Guards terrorists. All right, let's bring in our guests. From West Jerusalem, Fleur Hassan-Nahoum is Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem and member of the Likud party. In Washington, D.C., Ariel Gold is National Co-Director of activist group Code Pink. Her organization is banned from Israel. In Tel Aviv, Gideon Levy is columnist at Haaretz newspaper. Welcome to the program. Fleur, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us the sequence of events when it comes to the decision to deny entry to Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar? Because there's been a lot of back and forth about this. When exactly was the decision made by Prime Minister Netanyahu? Was it only after Donald Trump tweeted that now infamous tweet?
Look, it's impossible to really know what created the situation for the banning. We know a few things. We know that a couple of months ago, I think even a month ago, Israeli ambassador to the US, Ron Dermer, said that they would not ban entry of the two Congresswomen to Israel for respect for the Congress. As an act of respect for the Congress. And then we see a tweet from Trump, and then we see the banning. Having said that, I'm not sure that the tweet from Trump was the definitive factor. I think, in my opinion, once any normal person saw the actual itinerary, the agenda for the trip, you saw that this trip was not a trip done in good faith to understand the complexity of the conflict. Most trips that people come on, most politicians that want to really inform themselves, come on an agenda that is at least seemingly to be balanced. When you have on the first page of the itinerary of the agenda, visit to Palestine, and you're landing in Israel, you already know that the trip is not in any way possible a balanced trip. And it has already a pre-existing agenda, and the agenda is the demonization of Israel. These two women are the Congresswomen who try to pass through a BDS law in Congress. Now, we all know that BDS is a destructive organization that seeks one thing, the destruction of the state of Israel. Now, people can talk about the fact that BDS is equal rights. Its own founder, Barghouti, makes understood to everybody who speaks to him that BDS is actually essentially a movement to destroy the state of Israel, to destroy the Jewish state as we know it. And so once the agenda became clear, it's very easy to understand why the government decided that they should ban these two women. Remember, we passed a law 2 years ago that bans anybody who wants to incite boycotts to Israel. One of your other guests, Ariel Gold, is banned from Israel. We're talking about we're in a country that normally allows everybody to come in, even people who disagree with us. But when you invite somebody to your house and the person already tells you ahead of time that they want to burn your house down, I think it's pretty logical to ban those people from coming into our country.
Ariel, Fleur already mentioned your status when it comes to Israel. You, of course, are Jewish. You are a supporter of the BDS movement. What, as far as you are concerned, is your status when it comes to Israel now?
Well, Israel has told me that I'm not allowed to enter without explicit permission from the government. Last time I tried to come in, I did get permission from the government. I secured a visa in advance, but they still did not allow me into the country. You know, she spoke about balance, and she spoke about the trips that members of Congress take, and she described them as balanced. They are quite the opposite. You know, 2/3 of the travel that U.S. members of Congress take is to Israel, and it is almost exclusively through the lobby group AIPAC. These are not balanced trips at all. Peter Beinart correctly described them as Disneyland trips. These are one-sided trips that hide the occupation and have a specific agenda, and that agenda is to continue and increase unquestioned U.S. financial and diplomatic support for Israel, ignoring the human rights abuses that Palestinians suffer under. Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar were clear from the very beginning that they were coming to see the situation. They were coming to see the exact places that AIPAC doesn't take members of Congress. To go, for example, to the West Bank city of Hebron, where violent, ideologically extreme settlers live within the community. Now, balance would be more members of Congress traveling to see the full situation, seeing the situation in Gaza, seeing Hebron, seeing the checkpoints. This is not what happens on these AIPAC trips.
Gideon, you've written that U.S. lawmakers Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib have helped reveal the truth about Israel to their country and to the world. Could you explain to our viewers what you mean by that?
It's very simple. For a few years now, Israel is banning people according to their political views. Those who believe in the world that Israel is a democracy should know it, because there is no democracy in the world which bans people because of their political views. Israel does. And here, if the two Congresswomen would have been allowed to enter Israel, Israel could continue to claim that we are so open-minded, we are a democracy, we let anybody come. No, we don't. Even not if it's a Congresswoman, even not because someone who is stronger than all of us, President Donald Trump, told us to do so. I mean, the description that we heard before was quite ridiculous. I mean, it was very, very clear. The ambassadors say they will be allowed to Israel. The president tweeted, and 2 hours later, everything was very clear. And I don't complain. The Israeli prime minister is not in a position to say no to Donald Trump. But what really matters is to call the bluff. The lady from Jerusalem just said that we don't let people enter, those who want to destroy our country. No, it's not only your country, I'm afraid. Those ladies wanted to go to Palestine. Palestine is not ours. And the Palestinian occupied territories belong to the Palestinian people. And Israel cannot ban guests or who wants to go to meet their followers, their colleagues, their family members. I think that if a country in the world would have prevented members of the Israeli parliament to enter because of their political views, if it wouldn't be an Arab state who doesn't have close diplomatic relations with Israel, I think Israel would have taken measures. And I really hope that the Americans, or at least the new administration, will take measures and will draw the consequences. If Israel treats like this members of the American Congress, the United States has the full right to to react in the same language, because I'm afraid that's the only language that Israel will understand.
Fleur, it looked to me like you wanted to respond to what Gideon was saying. I would let you do that, but I also want to ask you more specifically about AIPAC, because that is something that Ariel was mentioning. Of course, we're talking about the powerful pro-Israel lobbying organization. It's the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Now, they have sponsored many trips for U.S. lawmakers to come to Israel. But beyond that, there was a pretty powerful statement from AIPAC issued after the decision to deny entry to Congresswomen Tlaib and Omar. They criticized the decision. They said every member of Congress should be able to visit and experience our democratic ally Israel firsthand. That is pretty significant, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, and that shows that AIPAC is more balanced than Ariel Gold is letting people believe. I've been at the receiving end, and I've hosted many missions to Jerusalem. And AIPAC missions that come to Jerusalem go to East Jerusalem, and they meet with activists in East Jerusalem. They go to Ramallah. They meet with politicians in Ramallah. They go to the West Bank. They meet nonprofit organizations. But I'll tell you what the difference is. The difference is that the people that AIPAC meet are bridge builders. They're people who want to solve the conflict. Now, the people who were receiving the two congresswomen are not bridge builders. They have zero interest in solving the conflict and bringing peace to our region. They are an organization, a radical organization that was set up by Hanan Ashrawi called Mifta. This is an organization which has put out anti-Semitic blood libels saying that Jews are still using Christian children's blood to make their matzah. This is what this organization has put out. Then afterwards, of course, they tried to erase it and to erase their record. This is an organization that is constantly looking to ways to discredit Israel, but also anti-Semitic organization. They're terrorist sympathizers with the PFLP. So there's a big difference between coming with an organization. I'm not against these women coming with a Palestinian organization that is into building bridges, that is into solving the conflict. What I will not allow is a rabidly anti-Semitic, a terrorist sympathizing organization to bring people to do a 5-day roadshow of hatred and delegitimization in our country. Yes, there's other people living here. We have the West Bank, which is supposed to be the autonomy of the Palestinian Authority. And what have the Palestinian Authority done with their autonomy? Created terrorist bases. They want to go to Palestine. It's very simple. Let them land in Egypt. Let them cross the border in Rafah and go to Gaza. Who's stopping them? But when you're going to land in Ben Gurion Airport and you're going to have an anti-Semitic organization with terrorist ties showing them around, it's our sovereign right to say we're not letting these people come to our country.
Ariel, to those who accuse you of being anti-Israel because you support BDS, what do you say to that accusation?
The land of Israel is incredibly holy and important to me. My ancestors lived there in the late 1400s in the town of Safed. I have family there. My children have traveled to Israel with their summer camps, and it pains me very deeply not to be able to go there. But upholding my Jewish values, which are the values of most American Jews, of freedom and dignity and equality for all people, is much more important to me. And, she spoke about me getting denied entry. So, we should talk about when I was in Ben Gurion Airport being interrogated and they were discussing denying me entry. Not at one time did they ask me about the BDS campaigns that I run. What they said was, why would you have friends with Arab names? Why do you spend time with Palestinians in Hebron? Why would you file which I did, a restraining order against a settler when you were there last? This isn't about delegitimizing or destroying the Jewish people. This is about maintaining a 52-year-long military occupation, a crippling siege, denying people basic human rights.
Gideon, how concerned are you that this is undercutting Israel's democracy? And also, I want to ask you more specifically about the fact that there are Jewish House Democratic members in the United States that are worried that this is going to empower critics of Israel and that it will actually fuel support of the BDS movement. What do you think about that?
First of all, let's challenge your assumption that Israel is a democracy. Israel is a democracy for its Jewish citizens. Israel is a kind of a democracy for its Palestinian citizens. But Israel cannot be considered as a democracy while in its dark backyard there is one of the most brutal tyrannies on earth today. I mean, the military occupation of the West Bank, the siege on Gaza are maybe one of the most really brutal and totalitarian regimes in the world today. How can this define Israel as a democracy? That's really a big question mark. And I really suggest that we will start to see Israel as one entity, as it is, with having three regimes. One of them is a brutal tyranny. Now, those steps are all part of a much bigger plan. Banning some activists in Ben Gurion does not define Israel as a democracy or not this by itself. But if you see the picture as a whole, you see the picture. I mean, I can recall one regime which did ban guests who opposed this regime of getting into the country, and this was the apartheid system in South Africa. If you were resisting the apartheid system, you couldn't get into South Africa. Very similar, very same motivations, and the same arguments. Again, they want to destroy us. So did the racists in South Africa say. Again, the world wants to destroy Israel. Those who criticize are anti-Semites. Those who criticize us wants to exterminate us. All those old propaganda, cheap arguments which have nothing to do with reality. And reality is very simple. There is a brutal occupation which no country in the world has recognized, which is a brutal violation of the human rights and of the international law. It takes now 52 years that nothing changed about this occupation. It just gets stronger and stronger. People with conscience around the world have not only the right, they have the duty to oppose it, to resist it. And the only way for people from the outside to resist it and also to do something, not only to pay some lip service, is to join BDS or any activist group who are ready also to do something, exactly like vegetarians who would ban butcheries, exactly like people who would ban sweatshops in Northeast Asia. There is the full right to boycott Israel, to boycott the occupation, because it is immoral.
Fleur, when U.S. President Donald Trump,
Yes.
I'll let you jump in just a second, but I want to also get this question in. Donald Trump has accused Democrats of having become an anti-Israel and an anti-Jewish party. Do you believe that? Do other members of the Likud party believe that rhetoric?
No, I don't believe it. I think that Omar and Tlaib are actually fringe members of the Democratic Party. I think most Democrats understand the complexity of this conflict. I think Gideon and Ariel present a very black and white picture of what's going on here. I do agree with Gideon on one thing. There is a brutal regime in the West Bank, but the brutal regime is that of the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority were given autonomy over the West Bank. 15 years ago, they had one election 15 years ago. Who's the brutal dictatorship and who's the brutal regime? So are we not supposed to give them autonomy? What are we supposed to do? We give the Palestinian Authority autonomy. They abuse that autonomy. They don't have a democracy in that autonomy. Only yesterday, they banned LGBTQ activities in the West Bank. And we're the brutal regime? We have 20% of our country are Arab Israelis. They have the full rights of every single citizen of this country. They are citizens of this country. I live in Jerusalem. 37% of Jerusalem are Arab East Jerusalemites. They have every full right that they can have here in this city. So what are they talking about? They're talking a very dark reality that they've created for themselves. I'm not saying that we're perfect. I'm not saying things have to change, but they're talking as if we haven't tried to make peace 3 times. We could have been celebrating 20 years of a Palestinian state. It's our fault that Arafat rejected. It's our fault that Mahmoud Abbas has rejected. It's our fault that every single generous offer to share this land has been rejected. That's also our fault. What else can you blame on us, really? Tell me. The other day, somebody was talking about Kashmir being our fault. And this, I appreciate that Ariel Gold has Jewish values, but please, Jewish values, come and live in Israel, see what's going on every day. I work with Arabs every single day. I encourage people who want to build bridges. We help and we work together to build a better society, a shared society. None of these women, Miftah is not interested in a shared society. Miftah is interested in a Judenrein here, not having Jews at all. Well, I'm not going to allow this to happen to my country, and neither is the Likud party, and neither is the government of the state of Israel. And yes, there's always things to improve. And yes, we have to constantly strive for peace. And yes, we have to develop the models of a shared society. But to have a group which is claiming the Jews are using Christian blood for making their bread, to have that group be the hosts of Omar and Tlaib, and to then have the cheek to say that this is trying to redress the balance. Please, listen, after the whole debacle, when Tlaib's grandmother, she was given a humanitarian entry for her grandmother to come and visit her grandmother. She wrote the letter was approved, and then she says, no, I'm not going, because you know what? I hate you more than I love my grandmother. We're never going to have peace with people who hate more than they love. I can tell you, people in Israel want peace. Most people want peace. I have 4 children, and believe me, I don't want them when they're 18 years old to have to put on an army uniform and go and fight. I don't want that as a mother. And I'm sure that if Ariel Gold lived here, she'd think a little bit differently. Nobody wants to live in conflict. But who do we make peace with? A brutal anti-LGBT, anti-women dictatorship that are throwing gays from the rooftops? These are the people that we're supposed to be making peace with? A government of the Palestinian Authority that hasn't had elections in 15 years, Mahmoud Abbas, a leader that gives himself a salary of $300,000 a month while his people don't have money. This is who we're supposed to be making peace with. Please, bring me some better partners. Bring me some better partners.
I'm sorry to interject. It's just that we're starting to run out of time. So I want to give Ariel a chance to respond to what you mentioned about her. And Ariel, I also want to ask you to speak more specifically about changing attitudes from American Jews, their stance toward Israel. Is there a generational shift in the attitudes by American Jews towards Israel?
A shunda to say such a racist thing as to accuse Rashida Tlaib of not loving her grandmother. Shame on you for that. And I'm quite curious here. I heard Fleur invite me in to see the situation. Did you invite me to come and see with my own eyes? Because I would love to. Okay. Back to the real question.
The government
here.
of Israel will
Changing
decide
American
if you can come or not.
Specifically, American democratic views on Israel. So in the last U.S. election, around 80% of American Jews voted Democratic. So when we talk about the Democratic Party, we are, by and large, talking about the positions of American Jews. And recently, over the past few years, we have seen major shifts in American Jewish opinion towards Israel, especially among young people. We have seen massive growth and rise from American Jewish youth. We could talk about the group If Not Now and all the incredible changes that they are making. American Jews, by and large, support at least partial dismantling of the settlements, oppose the occupation. Many American Jews support at least a boycott of settlements, and we are seeing cracks in what used to be unquestioned bipartisan support for Israel. After Ms. Tlaib and Ms. Omar were denied, presidential candidate Bernie Sanders, himself a Jew, mentioned that perhaps if Israel is going to be denying members of U.S. Congress perhaps they don't want the entirety of the $3.8 billion that we give Israel every year. I think this is something that we as Americans and that the U.S. Congress needs to start exploring.
All right, well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to end it there. Thanks to all our guests, Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, Ariel Gold, and Gideon Levy. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.